joining us, so that's really good. I hope you notice that we've now got this new posh camera, so the quality is much better, and I can see. Can I see you much better? Do I look much better? I'm hoping I look younger, kind of handsomer, but not in like an obvious way, just somehow enhanced.
Obvious would be fine.
Yeah, obvious would be fine. Such as I was saying, I'm not looking handsome. No, speakers, you're fine, such as I am. I know you're an East Ender and everything, but and Adana's there with some very round glasses. Very nice too. So welcome everyone. Let's just scroll through and see who's here. Raja, that's good. That's it. Now I'm going to at one point. Hello. Nice to see you. Oh yeah. Sudarshini, sorry. Nice to see you. Trouble is I can't always quite see, the name flicks on those. Okay. Marta Kusalin's appearing. Who else is here? Deepa. So welcome everybody, welcome. I think there's some people on YouTube as well tuning in. Is that right? So Domajit, are you there? Hello Domajit, welcome. Yeah, I think you're watching on YouTube. Maitreya Raj is there. I can't actually see you. Who?
Liz from Brighton.
Liz from Brighton, welcome. You're all on YouTube. So some of you are zooming in, including Sangajit from his tent nearby. He's very outdoorsy, but then he is Australian, and that's most of what Australia is. So welcome everybody. We have a few cities, but they're very dotted about. Welcome everybody, really good to see you. Oh good, welcome. So yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome on YouTube, welcome on Zoom. What? And is she here? And welcome to James's mom. I don't actually know your name, James's mom. Kay, welcome to you. In fact, let's say hello to the tech team. So here is James, which is Kay's son. So he is. You can wave from different sides of the planet. Hello. And let's have Caroline. Caroline's been really, really good and really helpful. Well, both of them have been really helpful. So here's Caroline. She uploads us afterwards, so she was up till very late last night. And let's have Sanjay as well. Sanjay, we've imported from our community to help with the tech. He's very, very good. Thank you for the waving. We wanted to show you the tech team just in case it feels so slick that you think you're watching BBC News. Caroline was saying that she didn't think that was a danger. Anyway, welcome everybody. Welcome those of you tuning in on Zoom. Welcome those tuning on YouTube. And some of you will be watching post a live evening. So welcome to you. Yeah, welcome to you. So tonight I'm going to be starting our exploration proper of the three myths. Jan Vacha talked last night, so if you haven't watched Jan Vacha's talk from last night, I really recommend that you catch up with that. And so we'll do look at that. That's setting the context for the three myths. Tonight I'm going to start looking at self-transcendence, and then Jan Vacha will carry on tomorrow evening. And of course, tomorrow in our retreat, we'll be starting to explore the lakshanas. Today we were exploring samadhi, but tomorrow we'll start to explore how to, or at least one approach, let's say, rather than how to, but one approach to working with the lakshanas in meditation. So that's what we'll be doing. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what we have called, what Bhante called, and what Subhuti called in his talk on the 2003 convention and in his Majjhimavani article. They called it self-development. Jan Vacha and I have decided to call it self-transcendence because there's no obvious reason why self-development culminates in a perception of reality as it is. You could just be developing yourself, and you're developing yourself in using lots of tools and traditions. So we're calling it self-transcendence. I thought I'd start with a story about my own ordination. 30 years ago now, I was 29 when I was ordained. I was very, very fortunate because the year that I was ordained was the first year that we wore robes. We wore these blue robes that you, in the traditional picture, but that you threw over your shoulder. And I remember getting a little note from Bante. I was living in Sakarti, and he wrote me a little note saying that if I wanted help with my robes, he'd be happy to show me how to wear them. So I ran down and he put them on for me. And I said, in a slightly camp way, oh, I've been trying, I couldn't get them on. And he said, I think they've worked it out in the last 2,500 years. So we're wearing robes, but more especially, we had the incredible fortune to have the retreat, 4-month retreat at Gukaloka, led by Subhuti and Suvadra. Subhuti becoming my public preceptor and Suvadra becoming my private preceptor. I remember thinking at the time, oh, that's just going to be how it is for years now. And of course, I think that was the only year that happened. So I did realize my fortune at the time, but I realize my great good fortune even more now. And in those days, your private ordination took place pretty much in the middle of the retreat. I'd had a very strong retreat until then, very happy retreat till then. Actually, got rather more difficult in the second half, but I won't go there. It'll take too long. But yes, I've had a very good retreat, very strong retreat. And yeah, I was 29. I was in robes. I had my head shaved. We were living a thoroughly and deeply Buddhist life, separated from the world. So there's a high degree of renunciation. We were almost camping in those days. I mean, Gukaloka is still pretty rough and ready, but it was rough without being ready in those days. There were no windows in the shrine room, for instance, so the wind and the rain used to just blow in. It was incredibly cold at times. So we were living pretty close to nature. For me, a little bit too close. I'd like to have had a bit more distance from nature. But we were living a renunciate life, effectively, separated from no contact with anybody outside the retreat for 4 months. We were obviously cultivating metta bhavana, maitri bhavana, and we were doing mindfulness of breathing every day. It was all of that was in a context of friendship. Some of my greatest friends that I've had in my life were there, not all, but some of them. The 4 of us Bandhus were all ordained together, Karma Bandhu, Loka Bandhu, Parama Bandhu and I. We'd been friends living in Sakarta together. We all went to Gukaloka together, so we went as friends. Of course, we were studying the 3 jewels, Bante's, the 3 jewels. And of course, we also had this very clear and strong element of intensity. So we were living a classic Buddhist life of renunciation, meditation, separateness from the world, study, friendship, and intensity. When you think of it, that describes so much of the life that's needed to make any decisive breakthrough into the nature of reality. And in those days, your private ordination, we had our own private ordination every evening, which was quite hard work because it went on for 17 evenings, very long evenings. Anyway, I remember my private ordination, obviously, I was privately ordained by Suvadra. And being on retreat with beloved preceptors who were so kind to me, both Suvadra and Subhuti. Even now, I still feel I still feel very grateful to them for their kindness, I was a mess at 29. And they were just both very kind and very understanding and very challenging when needed and very helpful. And so I had friends to look up to, friends that I was practicing with, really ideal conditions. So yes, in those days you'd go to the stupa, the stupa that we actually built on that retreat, the original stupa at Gukuloka, we built that year in 1990. And we built this stupa, and then I was ordained privately into it. And in those days, you used to stay the night. So they'd let you stay the night in the stupa on your own, and then you'd rejoin the retreat for breakfast the next morning. So what I did in the run up to the retreat, I'd written this puja, which I always emphasize had no literary merit whatsoever. It wasn't a poem. It was just, all I was trying to do in the puja was trying to, and this is something I always say to anyone that's going to be ordained, and to anybody that I'm privately ordaining or indeed publicly ordaining, is that one of the things you really need to do to prepare for ordination is to make sure as much of you is ordained as possible. If you leave bits out, they come round and bite you after ordination, and they bite you much harder than they do if you bring them out before ordination. I think this is something to really emphasize, that before ordination you really need to make sure that your preceptors and friends know everything there is to know about you, that you've confessed, that you've opened up, that you've explored your life, you've explored your intention to go for refuge and your resistances to that. You've got over your reactions. You've really worked out your relationship with Bhante Sangharajita. All of that needs to happen before the ordination. If it doesn't, I think, in my experience of the people I've seen, it really brings quite a lot of trouble. So what I tried to do was write this puja to bring as much of me as possible through that narrow gate of ordination. I didn't want to leave bits out. Of course, one always does, in a way, inevitably, because one doesn't know oneself as deeply as one thinks, especially I was 29, which now seems young. Interestingly, in those days, it didn't seem young at all. Nobody ever mentioned that I was young, which is, I'm afraid, anyway, that's another thing. Yes, I'd written this puja to recite afterwards to try to make sure that as much of me was ordained as possible. So I was privately ordained, and then when Subhadra left me in the stupa, I recited this puja that I'd been making quite in my free time for the last few weeks before I was ordained, remembering everyone I felt grateful to, remembering all the people I needed to confess to, apologize to. And I just read it out after my private ordination. As soon as I finished reading the puja out and closed my eyes, I seemed to see things as they really were, or as they really are. I had this experience, the likes of which I've never had before, of seemingly, as far as I can see, seeing the nature of things, seeing into the nature of things. Of course, you can never say anything about that experience because, by definition, that experience is beyond words, it's beyond time, it's beyond self and other, it's beyond any kind of model. I didn't think, what model am I in just now? Am I in the myth of self-surrender? Am I practicing the myth of self-discovery? Am I practicing the myth of self-transcendence? I just found myself in reality itself, or so I've come to think since. Of course, you can never say anything about that. And what happened to me, I think, was the shock of it was so great. I was sort of thrown backwards from the experience. And the first thing that I met coming back from it was not words, but a kind of a visionary, description, a visionary analogy for what had just happened, a kind of metaphoric picture for what had just happened that expressed as closely as my mind could come up with on the way back out of that experience, as closely I could. And what happened, what I saw was it was as if I'd been looking all my life down the wrong end of the telescope. That's how I understood it, in this kind of visionary, metaphoric way. I didn't think this up. It sort of came to me in a visionary sense, that I'd been looking at life through the wrong end of the telescope. And it was as if the kindliest imaginable hand had just tapped me very gently on the shoulder and turned the telescope round. And I had this incredible sense of release and relief. Things that I experienced things as being, well, for want of a better word, perfect. Perfect, of course, is a Christian concept, but it felt like everything Buddhism said was was true. The images of the Buddhas behind me, everything I'd learned from my teacher, Bhante Sangharajta, everything was true. And, or at least in the sense that, oh yes, it all made sense. Another visionary sort of metaphor came quickly after that, which was that it had been as if I'd been looking at this little tiny set of marks here, and I'd call that little set of marks me and my life. And then in this experience, I saw the whole tapestry. And those little marks were still sort of there, but they were not important, or rather, there was just something, incomparably vaster. And in this experience, nothing could be a problem at all. The possibility of problem couldn't arise, including death, it felt. So that was the experience I had, and then the experience closed, like a gate closing. And I was thrown back into my ordinary self, into the rather neurotic young man I was. I fell out of one consciousness and reappeared in my ordinary egotistical consciousness. I remember just worrying about my name and so on. When I was thinking about this just the other day, I was reminded a slightly frightening story of my niece who had a terrible road traffic accident. And I went to see her in hospital. She's one of mine. I've got many nephews and nieces. I went to see her in hospital, and she was in the worst coma you could be in, pretty much. And when I sat next to her, she opened her eyes and looked at me, but it wasn't her. It's very, very frightening. If anything, it was more like a lizard looking at you or something like that. There was she just wasn't in her eyes. And I remember being sort of shocked and horrified by that. She wasn't there. And you can imagine my family had that yearning faith that she would come back into her eyes and into her body. And then 2 weeks later or so, I went to visit her again, and there she was. She was all there again. She was still in hospital, still in intensive care. But when she opened her eyes, it was Eleanor again. Not even a bit of it or something of that consciousness or a damaged version of that consciousness, but the whole mysterious, unique selfhood that we'd called Eleanor, my oldest brother's daughter, was back again. And my experience that after my public ordination, my private ordination, just as when she had lost one consciousness, and you hoped and prayed and hoped that her consciousness would reappear, it was as if I'd lost my ordinary egotistical consciousness and I'd lived for a while in this new consciousness. And it was so sad to come back to being me again, just ordinary me again. But it's interesting when I think about that now, 30 years on, that's on the context of renunciation, the practice of the metta-bhavana, the mindfulness of breathing, beloved teachers that I looked up to. I remember Bhante was staying down in the retreat center, in the cottage down the valley. We used to take down his supper. Sivadra, Subhuti, all of my friends on the retreat, studying, all of that intensity. All of that happened as a result of that. And then, of course, of the result of my whole training, not just in ordination, but as soon as I'd come through the doors of the London Buddhist Centre and felt immediately welcomed and befriended. I felt that right from the very beginning. And in that experience itself, I seem to go even beyond gratitude, but what there was just that everything was perfect and that I was in receipt of so much. So that experience and experiences like it are a result of mostly of my life until fairly recently has been, I don't know whether recently enough, has been a life, as far as I can, committed to self-transcendence. So just to reiterate that in that experience itself, I didn't think that it's beyond any kind of model. That seeing of things is beyond any way of telling. It's certainly beyond any kind of model or myth. I think that's very important to remember, that we're trying to get somewhere that no model or myth or word can get. So what we're saying with self-transcendence, just to remind us, is that we're basically saying, we're imagining that the unconditioned is outside the conditioned and that we move towards it. So we have Buddhism, as we all know, starts in two places. It starts with enlightenment, the unconditioned. It starts with me. So in the model of, or the myth of self-transcendence, you grow towards the vision of the Buddha. You become ever more like the Buddha. That's the model of self-transcendence. What we're saying there is that egotism is so deep and so all-encompassing. Bhante's talked about it so much that what the path is the gradual thinning of egotism, refining and thinning and softening and making more and more transparent the self, so that you can break through into reality. That's as I understand, at least, the myth of self-transcendence. So what I want to do for the rest of this talk is see if we can together explore the manifest strengths of that model, but also start to touch on, I won't say the weaknesses. I think strengths and weaknesses, perhaps the wrong metaphor. I think Subhuta's metaphor of the front and the back is better. Any way of saying has its value and its problem. There's no way out of that. As soon as you say something, you're pushing reality forward in this way, and that means you're missing this bit. So it always has a front and a back. So I think that's probably better than strengths and weaknesses. Otherwise, you can start to slightly almost fall out over strengths and weaknesses. But of course, just to start at the very beginning, the metaphor of growth, the myth of self-transcendence, is easily understandable. It's easily understandable as a metaphor, and it's approachable for newcomers, so-called newcomers. I don't like this language of newcomers. I think we're reifying it too much, as if they're little babies or something. But in other words, you can just, pretty much anyone you could talk to in that language and they'll get it pretty much. If we do want to use the language of newcomers, it's worth remembering that a lot of the people that the Buddha taught were newcomers, as we'd call them. In fact, many people that the Buddha taught were newcomers. So we mustn't think that we can be beyond teaching the so-called newcomers. They're just people, grown-up people with lives. But yes, this self-transcendence is easily approachable by them. It's understandable, and it's really helpful to say you can use your will. That's what it's saying, isn't it? Okay, you can do something about your life. You can change it. You can use your will, the sort of will that, I don't know, does this and does that. You can use your will to change your life. You can look at what's not working in your life and you can use your will to do something about that. Surely that's as relevant now as ever. You don't need to posit an ideal so much at first. All you need to do is look at your life and see where it stings, see where it doesn't work, see the bum notes of it, and you can see, using your will, what to do about that. When I came along to Buddhism, I had very few friends. I had really very deep secrets that I was very ashamed of, and so on and so forth. And my meeting with the Buddha Dharma, with Bhante's elucidation of it, helped me be able to see issues and to start to do something about them using my will. And I had friends very, very quickly, order members and other friends, who were very willing to give me their time. I remember Kemananda, for instance, I used to meet him really, really regularly. And I remember coming back from my first solitary retreat, and I'd had a great big long list of things that I thought I'd experienced on this retreat and insights and so on. And he very patiently went through this whole list. I remember blue tacking it to his cupboard door, and it went all the way down the wall. I mean, I thought he was fascinating. He was probably deeply bored. But so I, in other words, I met people that were really willing to help me with the issues I had, that I could use my will, people could help me use my will, refine my will, make my will more intelligent, more flexible, and so on. So it's really, really wonderful. Secondly, this metaphor of self-transcendence, this myth of self-transcendence, gives us something to do. Yeah, really, really good that it gives you something to do. I think if you don't teach it, it's not at all clear what to do. I remember there was a while where people started teaching the Metta-bhavana practice in a very, I don't know, they were probably trying to teach it a bit more like Jana Vacha was teaching it earlier on this afternoon, but they weren't managing it. What they were managing is teaching the Metta-bhavana in a very flimsy, woolly, woozy way. And I remember this person teaching it, and he never mentioned the sentences you could say. And you could feel in the room that nobody knew what to do. Loving kindness, all beings. Okay, off we go. You could see that nobody knew what to do. Really helpful to say, okay, here's something you can do. You could say these sentences, here's how you do it. Now, it's easy as you get on in spiritual life to get a little bit critical of that and even scornful of that. And unfortunately, I have seen that at times, people being a bit scornful of that and even scornful of metta or bhavana itself. But surely none of us we can really afford. But it's really helpful when you don't know yourself, when you're young, when you're just coming into contact, that somebody gives you something you can do that doesn't require lots of psychological and spiritual nicety, that it isn't woozy and so on, that you can just do in a very straightforward way. So this whole myth of self-transcendence is really helpful in gives you something you can do, and you can teach it, and you can say you can go home and do that now at home. Go home, do those 5 stages, do the 4 stages of mindful breathing. Off you go. Many people go in those early times have dhyana experiences straight away, don't they? Because they've not worked out that there could be any issue with that. So that's very, very common, that beginner's mind that Bhante suggests we all need to keep in contact with. My third reason why I think self-transcendence is so valuable is it helps you value conditions in which to grow. I think as soon as you have the metaphor of growth, you have the metaphor of conditions for growth. You can say to people, it would be good if you went on a retreat. That's where you'll grow more, because it's in those conditions, and we've all experienced this, haven't we? It's in those conditions that your meditation goes deeper, your empathy for others is developed, your feeling for the natural world is enhanced. It's in those conditions that you grow more. So the metaphor of growth, of development, of transcendence, opens out the metaphor for conditions in which conditions that are propitious. Retreats, it helps you say, why don't you join a study group? It helps you say, why don't you get up in the morning to meditate? All of those things really are expressions of the, or at least one way of thinking of expressions of self-transcendence, of growth. Yeah? Another thing that I've been struck by is that I was only struck by this actually today, which was that the metaphor of growth and self-development, self-transcendence creates structures and forms. Yeah, you can then, it creates a structure and a form. For instance, Triratna's got a structure and a form. One day I'd love to give a whole talk on the nature of form. I'm very taxed by the nature of form in poetry, and there's something magical about form. When you get the right form of a poem, it's like it creates its own content. I think there's something metaphysical about that, that form creates its content. If you write a sonnet, you'll find that content is created by the form itself, content that you couldn't have thought up, content even if you've got the right form that goes beyond you. So Triratna has a form, and that form creates a content. So for instance, we've got the Mitra becoming a Mitra and the Mitra ceremony, and that creates the content of friendship, because that name is so important. Yeah, it's not a mentoring ceremony. The Mitra ceremony. We've got the form of the ordination training and the private and the public ordination. They're all forms that create content. I think this is probably true of all of these myths. As they're one way of thinking about these myths, that they're forms that create content, and they create content that's appropriate to the form. And of course, we're trying to eventually go beyond all form whatsoever. But I think this metaphor of self-development creates structure and form, and it enables hierarchy. You know? As soon as you have the idea of growth, of development, of self-transcendence, and the idea that you can grow and develop, well, that means that you can be more developed than you were a few years ago. And that means that other people could be more developed than you. So if you have that idea, that myth of development, it enables hierarchy. I think this is important because I think that human beings are deeply hierarchical. And if you don't enable healthy hierarchy, you'll easily create space for unhealthy hierarchy. Or hierarchy is something that's always up for grabs, that never settles down. I don't think there's a place where there's non-hierarchy. I think what you get is little infights, hierarchical infights. But that's something perhaps you can think whether you agree with me or not. But that was, again, something that I thought of today, that self-development enables hierarchy. And of course, even healthy hierarchy can go wrong, but is not, I don't think you have, personally, I don't believe you have the option of a non-hierarchy. I think what you have is hierarchy up for grabs and people making grabs for it using different ploys. So that's my first kind of net of things that I think are strengths of the model of self-development, self-transcendence. They're helpful in, they give you a helpful sense of using your will. They give you something to do. They make you value conditions that are propitious to help you grow. They create structures and forms, and they enable hierarchy, hopefully healthily. Of course, they also, the metaphor of, or the myth of self-transcendence also emphasizes the value of ethics, of friendship, of altruism. So the way that Bhante and Subhuti have put this is that they really emphasize karma nirma processes. I always find that a rather technical way of putting it, but the metaphor of growth and development really values karma, the law of karma, that your actions have consequences. The way I've been talking about it recently is saying that your actions matter. I think this is still something that Buddhism really has to offer the world, that your actions matter. And of course, in Buddhism, actions include your actions of your mind. Buddhism's got much deeper, more subtle understanding of action. Buddhism is saying that your actions matter. Everything you do, everything you say, even the things you think and remember and fret over, they matter. It's a terrible burden in many ways, but what the law of karma does is it shows you that actions matter and that you can shape your life by shaping your actions. So very briefly and sort of broadly, Those are two of the areas, broad areas. I've given you all sorts of subtitles in those that I hope show us the real value of the system that Bhante has largely taught, or rather, his teaching has been more overtly a teaching of self-development, self-transcendence, the true individual going beyond the group to the individual, and so on. That's the kind of language he's tended to bring to the foreground. That's the kind of language that we tend to bring to the foreground. But of course, all of those strengths, and obviously I'm not going to reiterate all of those plus side and then say the negative side, because I don't think that's justifiable. But of course, this myth of self-development, self-transcendence, I've just tried to suggest some of the front it has. And I think it's much more than even that I've said, but you can go on forever with these things. It also has this back, and I want to sort of start to say something about the back of this metaphor, of this myth. Johann Vogt will carry on with both tomorrow night. So the first back of this myth that for me touches on my life very strongly is the danger of an infinite regress. This is something that I think I sort of a few years ago really crashed into and precipitated a change in my attitude to meditation particularly, and to some degree a change in my thinking about spiritual life. This danger of an infinite regress. What we have, or at least what I was taught, perhaps is more, or what I understood from what I was taught, because I understood it through my own psychology and biases and so on. What I felt I learned was, for prajna, you need samadhi. For samadhi, you need sila. So if you can't see the nature of things, you need to go back to samadhi. If you can't get into samadhi, it's because there's something wrong with your sila. That's a exquisitely Buddhist understanding of things. But if you take it literally, if you take it clumsily, it's got quite a bad back, as it were. So what I think we end up with sometimes is that what I call it a sort of equation that I got stuck in, which is the equation, if I had a board, would be for B, you need A. Yeah, amazing that I'm even imagining the word equation. I think it's an equation. For B, you need A. Yeah, that's what I learned. For B, with it prajna or indeed samadhi, you need A. Yeah, you need something else. Yeah, I think as soon as you evoke that equation, you evoke all kinds of sort of problems of misreading that equation. So some people, when you say for B, you need A, they say, I don't need A. I want B. B's sexy. I want B. B. I don't need A. And then some of those people even say, people who need A, they're just sort of newcomers. They're not really, they're just sort of beginners. They just, I don't need A. So that's one way you can get that equation wrong. Actually, no, I don't need A. I've already got A. I just want B. Actually, that's actually how I started. I wasn't interested in metta, I remember. I just wanted a breakthrough into reality. I wanted B. I didn't want A. I didn't really see it was needed. Of course, I was forced back to A. What I then experienced later on is that the other problem is if you have for B, you need A, you can infinitely extend A. Yeah? For B, you need A. If you're of a self-critical typology like myself, and if you're quite honest about yourself, I try to be, if you're quite honest about yourself, and you can see yourself without rose-colored spectacles and without gloss, you see that there's everything yet to be done about A. You can feel that your samadhi is never deep enough, that your ethics are never pure enough, that your relaxation even is still not full. So what I got into was infinitely extending A. So what that did is it pushed B further and further away. It made B, which in this case was prajna or insight, more and more distant. Every time so that I couldn't bear to think about B because there was so much to do with A. I found that even with some of my friendships, some of my friends would talk to me about their experiences of B, and I'd feel very, rubbish. I'd basically feel jealous and envious, and I'm nowhere. I'm still stuck in the hinterlands of A. I can't possibly even get to B. So I think certain typologies will infinitely extend A and find that as a reason never to get to B. Yeah? And I think that's created by that, that equation. You end up with this infinite regress. You've never got enough metta, you've never got enough mindfulness, etc., to do the 6-element practice, to adequately do sadhana. You never get there. Yeah? And you can see how then some people then, if you've done that for a lot and got really frustrated with that, you then try to break that model altogether and just say, actually, I'm already the Buddha, or something that gets around that painful matter of infinitely extending A. I think that's why some people lose faith in bhavana itself. I remember Bhante saying that the word that's often used in traditional text that we've translated as meditation is often the word bhavana. So one of the reasons why we can lose faith in bhavana is because we've got stuck in infinitely extending A and not getting to B. And then feeling people who talk about their B experiences, either you try to dismiss their experience and think, oh, you're alienated and so on, or you just feel bad that you haven't got it and feel weakened and so on. For me, that's been quite a back to this metaphor. And I think that might be one of the reasons why people can give up on certain kinds of meditation, because it feels like they can never get to B. So that's the first thing, that the first back to this metaphor, I think, is that there can be this infinite regress. Yeah? You can never get to B. The other problem of this myth of self-transcendence is that, and again, I experienced this very much when I was younger, is that you can always sacrifice the present for the future. If it's taken clumsily, literally, unintelligently, it becomes the philosophy of jam tomorrow, doesn't it? It becomes, I'm going to do all these things, including some things I don't want to do, in the hope that it will bear fruits tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So I wonder, looking back, I've been involved with the movement for so long, relatively long. I wonder, looking back, I've lived in communities, I think, in the community above the Buddhist Center for about 32 or 33 years, something like that. And I've seen lots of people come and go in communities. Actually, the community that we're in now, that we've been in lockdown, has been wonderful. I don't know when any of your community members are watching, apart from the unvarchable, but it's Sandra. It's been just wonderful. They're such good guys that we're living with. And not backwards in coming forward, but that's another story. Looking back on it, I think some people moved into community and started working in team-based right livelihood because they thought that if they did those things that perhaps they didn't want to do today, they'd get jam tomorrow. Actually, I'm really pleased that I did that. If I hadn't have done that, I would have almost certainly moved in with my partner, Gary, and I would have finished with him by now, probably numerous times. But anyway, so I'm actually very pleased that I didn't do that. I'm very pleased that I did have that sense that there's sacrifices are worth making in the present for future flourishment. But you can see how you could get that wrong. Yeah, you could get that wrong. You could do things in the present in the hope that the future will bring you jam, if you see what I mean. So I think this can happen, that you constantly sacrifice the present for the future. And you see how that's the back, one of the back of this model of self-transcendence, this model of growth, that today is never good enough, tomorrow is always going to be better. Something really valuable about that, as I've already said, because if today isn't good enough, there is things that you can do to make it better. And that self is always something that you can grow and change. But you can also see that there's a back of that. Coming out of those two things, this sense of infinite regress, this equation of for B you need A, and then for some people extending A infinitely, and then dismissing or criticizing people who talk about B, or being unpleasant to those people who are talking about B, or people who are really into B and are scornful and critical people who are doing A. With all of that, and then within this tendency to postpone, to sort of sacrifice the present to the future, one of the dangers of self-transcendence is it can lead to sort of, well, burnout, but it can really lead to disappointment, even despair. I think it did for me a good few years ago now. I did really feel that I just got nowhere. I mean, I've historically been rather prone to those kind of feelings. And again, so one learns through one's own tainted mind. So, one has to sort of own that. But it's easy to feel like I've done all this striving, I've done all the right things. Luckily, I didn't ever try to be celibate as well. And of course, that's a good thing in itself, but I'm very glad that I didn't, go that way as well. But, you can imagine how you get older and you think, I've done all this striving, I've lived in a community, I've worked in a team pastoral livelihood, I've been celibate, and actually still, I don't feel I've got to be. Yeah. So you can see how it can lead to a sense of disappointment, even to despair. You can then see how it leads to a sense of even being duped slightly, that you were sold something that never paid. You can see how all of that arises quite naturally, quite sort of, in a sense, logically, from the back of this myth. You can see that that's quite, in a way, understandable. And you can even understand how it's easy then to blame the people who taught you and so on. Some of us, if not all of us, have possibly been there at times. Hopefully we've come back from there as soon as possible. But you can see that. So do you see, it's a very, somebody was asking, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, in Australia, saying, why are we doing this? And, we're trying to say one myth better than other. I think what we're trying to do, John Archer and I are trying to do, is really think deeply into these great myths and try and become more humanly alert to their great strengths, and all of them have got great strengths, and the weaknesses that come along with them, and the back that comes along with them. If we have that, if we have a much more nuanced and intelligent and understanding sense of that, we might have a more nuanced and intelligent and understanding attitude towards each other. That's what I personally hope, anyway. One last thing, one last part of the back that will continue tomorrow. And again, this only occurred to me today, actually. And I hope as you think about these things will occur to you. One of the values of us sitting here talking like this is to help us all sort of think about our own Dharma life, however long it's been, what myths have you benefited from, and also what back of the myth have you fallen foul to. Let's not blame anybody for that, but let's try to understand that so that we can progress, to use that metaphor, more skillfully. But one of the things I think also arises negatively from this myth is the tendency to compete and to compare. Because if you have this idea of growth and transcendence, and if that's enabled hierarchy, and as I say, I think I think hierarchy is an inevitable thing. And if you don't have healthy ones, you will have unhealthy ones, or you'll have chaotic hierarchies popping up all the time. And then nothing very substantial will be achieved in that world of sort of hierarchies popping up and disappearing every so often. What if you do enable hierarchy, then before you know it, you're also enabling competition, and competition easily becomes neurotic. It's not a bad thing. Bante's spoken very well and very subtly about the value of competition, and he's quite right. But it can, for some people, become really quite harmful, where you're constantly comparing yourself with people who you think have done better in spiritual life than you have. It becomes absurd because you compare that they're kinder than you are and so on, which is really quite mad. But many of us have got into that. So I think it also, that becomes the negative side of enabling hierarchy, even a healthy hierarchy. So those are my thoughts about this myth of self-transcendence. For me, I feel that I've been given so much with this myth. It's a myth that I first met when I was 25. I met friends, and I met people who were willing to help me work with my will so that I could change my life, and my life really needed changing. And I was able to use my will. I was able to do something. I was able to see the value of conditions. I did move into community. I did go on retreats. I started meditating every day right from the beginning. It did give me a sense of structure and therefore meaning to my life. It did enable a sense of hierarchy. For the first time in my life, I met people I really, older people, men and women that I really looked up to. It really did create friendship and ethics in my life. It did all of those good things. And it also brought with it, dragged with it a sort of back, which took me much longer to unpick, because you can kind of fall foul of the back and then just push the front more and push yourself to develop more. But just to say finally, I wanted to then bring us back to Buddha. I thought very interesting thought that these myths are acculturated. They appear in particular cultural forms. So that the myth of self-development or self-transcendence, as we're calling it, goes very well with modernism, with the modern world. And of course, I come from an art background, and I was very struck by that. And if you think about that, it makes a lot of sense. I was at art school when I first came along to the London Buddhist Centre when I was 25, and I'd studied to some degree the history of art, particularly the history of modern art. So you started with Courbet's realism, and that was then overturned by Monet's, Pissarro's impressionism, which was then radicalized and revolutionized by Cézanne's post-impressionism. Then you got expressionism, you then got cubism, all of these isms, all of these movements. And it's interesting that we're a movement, and there were movements, all of those movements, all the way from realism, all the way to cubism and synthetic cubism, and then abstraction and so on. In their own way, metaphorically at least, but in their own way, they were all attempts to see things as they really were. So Courbet would say, no, these sort of pallid nudes, these historical scenes, they're nothing to do with real life. He wanted to paint real life as he saw it. So he scandalously created realism, which was hugely radical at the time. The Emperor Napoleon struck one of his paintings with his riding crop. He was so horrified by it. We forget how radical it was. Impressionism then came along. Cézanne, a great hero of mine, he then created this, became the father effectively of modern art. People would go along to see his paintings to have a really good laugh. Matisse, when he discovered what became called Fauvism, it was a big sort of event in Paris. You'd go along to see his painting of his wife called, I think, Woman in a Hat. and people would be, you could hear them galleries away screaming with laughter around this painting. Now, of course, they look rather pretty and rather likable. We forget their radical roots. Yeah? But you see that they're all movements. And for a while, we kept on looking for movements, the next great thing that was going to take us forward. So you can start to see how postmodernism came along, where all of that idea of movements broke down. Yeah. Anyway, that's quite interesting that we've come out of a movement with that sense of progress, that sense of the past needing to be radicalized, and we need to progress and we need to change. And the movement came out of that 60s idealism, which was very much a movement, a breaking from post-war depression and so on. So all of these ideas appear to us in a kind of cultural context. But I hope that that's given you some sense tonight of both the strengths of self-transcendence and the front of self-transcendence and the back. And I think I'll leave it for that. So what I think we'll do is we'll just have, how long a break do you think we should have, Jana Varcha? 5-10 minutes? Let's have a 10-minute break, I think. And then Jana Varcha will come up and we'll perform puja together and conclude our evening by that. So let's have a 10-minute break. We'll start again at 25 to 9 British Summer Time.
Okay, very good. So, yes, thank you much for Bandu. I'm going to conclude the day with a sevenfold puja, which we'll do every evening. And for the different myths and lakshanas and phases of this retreat, we've sort of chosen, as it were, different archetypal figures, different deities, to represent what we're talking about. And you'll have noticed on the shrine for the last day and a half, we've had Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, the greatly precious guru, on the shrine. And beneath him, I don't know if you can see the shrine, how well you can see the shrine, but beneath him we've got this very, very beautiful photograph of Bhante in robes, sitting on rocks, reading. Very, very beautiful. Just seems very fitting to have him sitting under Padmasambhava. I don't know if we can zoom in. We probably can't zoom into.
I can pick it
up. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, go on.
James is going to pick up Bhante, as it were. It's actually a really lovely image. I don't know if you've seen it before, but it's very, very beautiful.
Kavira took it, I think.
Did he?
Mm-hmm.
So
it's not posed.
It feels appropriate to have Padmasambhava on the shrine as the figure representing, well, you can choose any of them, can't you? But we just felt it was somehow symbolic and significant. We both sort of decided it would be Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava, in a way, the figure of Padmasambhava, for me anyway, is so much associated with action. You know, so he was called to Tibet because of the local demons and deities obstructing the Dharma, the building of the monastery, and nobody else could do anything. And Padmasambhava goes straight and confronts the demons, doesn't he? He doesn't go straight to the king of Tibet, who's called for him. He goes to the cremation grounds and confronts what needs to be confronted, and then transforms the demons. He transforms the energies that need to be transformed in service of the Dharma. It's a very active path that Padmasambhava represents, at least in this context. There are other teachings of Padmasambhava, Dzogchen teachings and so forth, which in a way lean towards a different myth, but we wanted to just focus on this active, transformative, even confrontational aspect of Padmasambhava, which can be have resonance with this myth of self-transcendence. And what we thought we'd do each night, now perhaps before I say a little bit more about the puja, I mean, it's of course lovely to finish an evening with a puja, but there's more to it than that. I think that what I want to sort of say is that, you know, we haven't yet got onto the myth of self-surrender and devotion and faith and so forth, but really we do need devotion and faith in order for the heart to open deeper. This myth of self-transcendence is nothing if there isn't a goal beyond us to open up to serve. So although we may not talk about it explicitly, tomorrow when we start introducing the Lakshana of Anitya, of impermanence, I'd really urge us to stay connected in whatever way we can with Shraddha, with faith, and even with devotion, as well as with metta and with gratitude. For these Lakshana teachings to work, as I say, I think there has to be a context of metta and of Shraddha. So the puja isn't just for the evenings, if you see what I mean. If you can carry on some sense of faith and devotion into your days practice tomorrow, I think, and subsequent days, it will bear fruit. I'm sure I don't need to say that for many of you, but what I'm trying to say is that we can't say everything all at once, but actually that's what we need to be doing, all of it. Yeah. So in the pujas, we're going to begin with hearing some words of Bhante. So each evening we'll hear, Maitreya Bandhu's been compiling a book with extracts of Bhante in his own words from different phases of his life. So it's lovely to just hear Bhante. Maitreya Bandhu is going to read tonight the words of Bhante. And then we'll do the puja in call and response with the people in the Adhisthana shrine room in the community here responding, and you'll be responding, albeit, as it were, on mute. And the refuges and precepts we'll do in unison. Although this is an order retreat, we have got mitras here in the Adhisthana shrine room, and there may be some mitras watching online as well. So we're just going to do the 5 precepts. So you may have been wondering why we did the 5 precepts last night. That's why we'll carry on doing the 5 precepts. And the reading, which I read last night from the Vajrasattva practice, the confounder of hell sadhana, the reading which begins Amal or, which is an expression of wonder, an expression of awe even at the nature of reality. We'll hear that every night, and tonight Maitreya Bandhu will read that. And then we'll finish the puja with Maitreya Bandhu leading us in the Padmasambhava mantra. So we won't do the concluding mantras. We'll finish with the Padmasambhava mantra. And here we'll be making offerings to this shrine. And I invite you to make offerings to your shrines. And then we'll end with silence, and we'll leave. And as yesterday, Caroline or James will extinguish the candles, and that'll be the cue to close down your laptop and conclude the day. Okay. So let's set ourselves up for the puja. Oh, let's salute the shrine. I keep forgetting to salute the shrine. You have to excuse me. It's so weird doing this to camera because the shrine's sort of behind me. But let's start by saluting the shrine. Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Buddhaya.
Namo
Dhammaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Sanghaya. Namo Namah.
So settling down into your posture. Just coming in, bringing in awareness back into the body, letting go. of thoughts and words. Resting the awareness in the body.
I had never seen an image of Padmasambhava before, perhaps not even a painting. As I entered the temple, all the greater was the shock, therefore, when I saw in front of me 3 or 4 times larger than life, the mighty, sedent figure of the semi-legendary founder and inspirer of the Nyingma tradition. A skull cup in his left hand, a staff topped with skulls in the crook of his left arm, and the celebrated, wrathful smile on his moustached face. All this I took in instantly, together with the lotus hat, the richly embroidered robes, and the much smaller flanking figures of his 2 consorts, one Tibetan and one Nepalese. Having taken it in, I felt that it has always been there, and that in seeing the figure of Padmasambhava, I had become conscious of a spiritual presence that had in fact been with me all the time. Though I had never seen the figure of Padmasambhava before, it was familiar to me in a way that no other figure on earth was familiar and fascinating. It was familiar as my own self, yet at the same time infinitely mysterious, infinitely wonderful, and infinitely inspiring. Familiar, mysterious, wonderful, and inspiring it was to occupy a permanent place in my inner spiritual world, even as it played a prominent part in the spiritual life and imagination of the entire Himalayan region.
Sevenfold puja. Worship. With Mandarava, blue lotus, and jasmine.
With Mandarava, blue lotus, and jasmine.
With all flowers pleasing and fragrant.
With all flowers pleasing and fragrant.
And with garlands skillfully woven.
And with garlands skillfully woven.
I pay honor to the princes of the sages.
I pay honor to the princes of the sages.
So worthy of veneration.
So worthy of veneration.
I envelop them in clouds of incense.
I envelop them in clouds of incense.
Sweet and penetrating.
Sweet and penetrating.
I make them offerings of food, hard and soft.
I make them offerings of food, hard and soft.
And pleasing kinds of liquids to drink.
And pleasing kinds of liquids to drink.
I offer them lamps encrusted with jewels.
I offer them lamps encrusted with jewels.
Festooned with golden lotus.
Festooned with golden lotus.
On the paving sprinkled with perfume.
On the paving sprinkled with perfume.
I scatter handfuls of beautiful flowers.
I scatter handfuls of beautiful flowers.
Salutation. As many atoms as there are.
As many atoms as there are.
In the 1,000,000,000 worlds.
In the 1,000,000,000 worlds.
So many times I make reverent salutation.
So many times I make reverent salutation.
To all the Buddhas of the three eras.
To all the Buddhas of the three eras.
To the Siddhartha.
To the Siddhartha.
And to the excellent community.
And to the excellent community.
I pay homage to all the shrines.
I pay homage to all the shrines.
And places in which the Bodhisattvas have been.
And places in which the Bodhisattvas have been.
I make profound obeisance to the teachers.
I make profound obeisance to the teachers.
And those to whom respectful salutation is due.
And those to whom respectful salutation is due.
Going for refuge. This very day.
This very day.
I go for my refuge.
I go for my refuge.
To the powerful protectors.
To the powerful protectors.
Whose purpose is to guard the universe.
Whose purpose is to guard the universe.
The mighty conquerors who overcome suffering everywhere.
The mighty conquerors who overcome suffering everywhere.
Wholeheartedly also I take my refuge.
Wholeheartedly also I take my refuge.
In the Dharma they have ascertained.
In the Dharma they have ascertained.
Which is the abode of security against the rounds of rebirth.
Which is the abode of security against the rounds of rebirth.
Likewise in the host of bodhisattvas.
Likewise in the host of bodhisattvas.
I take my refuge.
I take my refuge.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato
Samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranam gacchami. Dhammang saranam gacchami. Sanghang saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi buddhang saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammang saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi sanghang saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammang saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi sanghang saranam gacchami. Anatipata Brahmani Sikhapadam Sammadhyami. Abhinadana Brahmani Sikhapadam Sammadhyami. Kamesu Nechachara Brahmani Sikhapadam Sammadhyami. Musavada Brahmani Sikhapadam Sammadhyami. Suramirya Maja Amadana Brahmani Sikhapadam Sammadhyami. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. With deeds of loving kindness, I purify my body. With open-handed generosity, I purify my body. With stillness, simplicity, and contentment, I purify my body. With truthful communication, I purify my speech. With mindfulness clear and radiant, I purify my mind.
Confession of faults. The evil that I have heaped up.
The evil that I have heaped up.
Through my ignorance and foolishness.
Through my ignorance and foolishness.
Evil in the world of everyday experiences.
Evil in the world of everyday experience.
As well as evil in understanding and intelligence.
As well as evil in understanding and intelligence.
All that I acknowledge to the protectors.
All that I acknowledge to the protectors.
Standing before them.
Standing before them.
With hands raised in reverence.
With hands raised in reverence.
And terrified of suffering.
And terrified of suffering.
I pay salutations again and again.
I pay salutations again and again.
May the leaders receive this kindly.
May the leaders receive this kindly.
Just as it is with its many faults.
Just as it is with its many faults.
What is not good, O protectors?
What is not good, O protectors?
I shall not do again.
I shall not do again.
Rejoicing in merit. I rejoice with delight.
I rejoice with delight.
In the good done by all beings.
In the good done by all beings.
Through which they obtain rest.
Through which they obtain rest.
With the end of suffering.
With the end of suffering.
May those who have suffered be happy.
May those who have suffered be happy.
I rejoice in the release of beings.
I rejoice in the release of beings.
From the sufferings of the rounds of existence.
From the sufferings of the rounds of existence.
I rejoice in the nature of the Bodhisattva.
I rejoice in the nature of the Bodhisattva.
And the Buddha.
And the Buddha.
Who are protectors.
Who are protectors.
I rejoice in the arising of the will to enlightenment.
I rejoice in the arising of the will to enlightenment.
And the teaching.
And the teaching.
Those oceans that bring happiness to all beings.
Those oceans that bring happiness to all beings.
And are the abode of welfare of all beings.
And are the abode of welfare of all beings.
Entreaty and supplication. Saluting them with folded hands.
Saluting them with folded hands.
I entreat the Buddhas in all the quarters.
I entreat the Buddhas in all the quarters.
May they make shine the lamp of the Dharma.
May they make shine the lamp of the Dharma.
For those wandering in the suffering of delusion.
For those wandering in the suffering of delusion.
With hands folded in reverence.
With hands folded in reverence.
I implore the conquerors desiring to enter nirvana.
I implore the conquerors desiring to enter nirvana.
May they remain here for endless ages.
May they remain here for endless ages.
So that life in this world does not grow dark.
So that life in this world does not grow dark.
Hey Maho, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. Within the birthless, all things take their birth, yet in that birth, nothing is born. Hey Maho, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. Within the ceaseless, all things cease to be. Yet in that ceasing, nothing ceases. Hey Maho, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. Within the non-abiding, all abides. yet thus abiding, there abideth not. Maho, Dharma wondrous strange, profound is mystery of the perfect ones. In no perception, everything is perceived. Yet this perceiving is quite perceptionless. Maho, Dharma, wondrous strange, profound is mystery of the perfect ones. In the unmoving, all things come and go. Yet in that movement, nothing ever moves.
The Heart Sutra. The Bodhisattva of compassion, when he meditated deeply, saw the emptiness of all five skandhas, and sundered the bonds that caused him suffering. Here then, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is only emptiness, emptiness only form. Feeling, thought, and choice, consciousness itself, are the same as this. All things are by nature void. They are not born or destroyed, nor are they stained or pure, nor do they wax or wane. So, in emptiness, no form, no feeling, thought, or choice, nor is there consciousness. No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. No color, sound, smell, taste, touch, or what the mind takes hold of, nor even act of sensing. No ignorance or end of it, nor all that comes of ignorance. No withering, no death, no end of them. Nor is there pain or cause of pain, or cease in pain or noble path to lead from pain. Not even wisdom to attain. Attainment too is emptiness. So know that the Bodhisattva, holding to nothing whatever, but dwelling in prajna wisdom, is freed of delusive hindrance, rid of the fear bred by it, and reaches clearest nirvana. All Buddhas of past and present, Buddhas of future time, using this prajna wisdom, come to full and perfect vision. Hear then the great Dharani, the radiant peerless mantra, the prajna paramita, whose words allay all pain. Hear and believe its truth. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhisvaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhisvaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhisvaha. Transference of merit and self-surrender. May the merit gained, in my acting thus,
in my acting thus.
Go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
Go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
My personality throughout my existences.
My personality throughout my existences.
My possessions.
My possessions.
And my merit in all three ways.
And my merit in all three ways.
I give up without regard to myself.
I give up without regard to myself.
For the benefit of all beings.
For the benefit of all beings.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Are serviceable in many ways.
Are serviceable in many ways.
To the infinite number of beings.
To the infinite number of beings.
Inhabiting limitless space.
Inhabiting limitless space.
So may I become.
So may I become.
That which maintains all beings.
That which maintains all beings.
Situated throughout space.
Situated throughout space.
So long as all have not attained.
So long as all have not attained.
To peace.
To peace.
Om Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi 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 Om Vajra Padma Siddhi Om Vajra Guru 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 Padma Siddhi
Vajra Admasi Vajra Admasi Om Vajra Admasi Om Vajra Admasi Om Vajra Admasi